Good day, everyone. Everyone seemed to like my first video so much about 2013 Ford Fusion transmission fluid changes. I'm making another one here. You've just hit a curb with your car and the mechanic says your wheel bearings need to be changed, or you've got a vibration in your front end. Also wheel bearings. Now it sounds tricky, it sounds very mechanic wise, but I can assure you that it is very, very easy to do. So what I did is I went and I thought I was going to have to tear apart the wheel bearing itself like it shows in all the videos. Not so. Very, very easy job. Takes about an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on your tool and your mechanical know-how. But let's get started, okay? So you got your wheel, and then you take your wheel off. Bye-bye wheel. Easy part, right? Next, your tools that you're going to need to have get this job done. Impacts are always helpful. This little gizmo, if you don't know, you should have one. This is a gear puller. This makes pulling off the rotor so much easier. You have got your standard ratchet sockets. I have a nice little snipe bar that fits over top of the ratchet, just like so, and that gives you a lot more leverage, makes life a lot easier. Your WD-40 is your best friend, and of course your new wheel bearing that you get at Auto Value. For mine it was about $170, and it comes all one piece. No problem. 4 bolts, that's all, people. 1, 2, 3, 4, that's all, and then she's on. So what you might need to buy are 2 big sockets. You have your first one here, which is for your axle nut. Axle nuts. They'll usually get this wrong. If you've got a crescent wrench that has measurements on it, you can use that. It'll give you a good indicator. This one is a 2013 Ford Fusion, and it's a 31 millimeter to get on there. Very weird size. Had to special order it. Next is your strut nut and bolts. These 2 buggers right here. They ended up being a weird size as well, a 24 millimeter to get onto there. You only need the one and a crescent wrench on the other side. Impact or just brute force will do it for you. You've got your calipers here, and then you've got 2 bolts. This one right here and one right below it. I've already loosened these 2 off, and the caliper is ready to come off. Alrighty, that nasty caliper is off of there, and what I do is I like to take a piece of twine on it, because you've got your hose clamp, your hose brake line here that you do not want to break. So what I do is I tie some twine on there, or some tie wire, and I just tie that up onto the coil. That's all. Just hold it up there out of the way for yourself. Slips on pretty easily, and it was just 2 bolts holding it on. Okay, that's all of that part. Now comes the axle nut. This one right here, that big 31 millimeter I told you about. It's probably different for every vehicle, so that you know, the tool makers can keep making money. So I'll just throw the impact and take that big nut off of there. Okay, now that the nut is nicely loosened off here, get it right to the end. So you've got the nice little dimple showing, and look at that, it ends up right with that point, lines up perfectly. So what we're going to do is we're going to mount the gear puller on to the rotor, which I have completely doused in WD-40. Doused it and doused it, because the heat actually helps it rust on to the hub. So lots of WD-40 at the beginning, people. Throw your gear puller on, or grab your mallet, hammer, crowbars, pry bars, and wiggle that rotor off. Well, folks, I'll tell you, even with my nifty little design here, that took some effort to get that puppy off there. Lots and lots of that gorgeous WD-40 and the gear puller. You don't have to use an impact on the end of it, just makes it easier. But she popped off finally. It was a good fight. It was a good fight, I'll tell you. Okay, now you've got your hub fully exposed. You can remove the axle nut completely. Now with the axle nut removed, we can just move on to the strut nuts and bolts. Like I said, that's one of the larger sizes. You'll probably have to go and buy a socket for it. So let's loosen off those two big bolts and they're nuts. So you only need the one socket, hopefully an impact, and a crescent wrench. Or like my setup here with the snipe. If you've got a nice big ratchet, then use that with a snipe on it, and you've got pretty good access there, so you can get onto it with your full body weight if need be. Alrighty, let's get those off. Alrighty folks, those strut nuts and bolts came off like butter. A little easier than I expected actually. So you got your one, your two, and the other side. Thumb wrench, impact, nice big 24mm socket. Let's get those bolts out of there. And with those bolts out of there, your strut is now free and you can basically pull the whole unit down. Easy peasy, just like that. And she comes nice and loose there. So you still got the control arm attached. You still have the bottom attached. And all you need to do is pull this down and the axle will push right back up and separate, and then you can just pull the CV joint axle out of the hub, and that will give you access to the 4 bolts that we need on the back. Hang on one second. Okay, so I pushed the axle from the end through the hub and off she comes, just like that. And now with that free and out of the way, you can access the 4 bolts. Okay, so there is your CV axle joint, and right around there, let's get a good look at that. There is your hub. There is your new one. Just like that. Easy. 4 bolts around the back. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those come off. New one goes on. 4 bolts. That's all, people. Alrighty, 4 bolts off. Managed to reach them all with this big bulky impact and a 15mm socket. All 4 of them. Reach right around the back there. Took them all off. Took me 15 seconds. 4 bolts out. We'll clean it up a little bit. Done. And we'll put on our new wheel bearing. Old. Yeah. No pounding, no beating the center out of it, no replacing the little bearing cylinder inside with all the splines and everything. That's it. Just 4 bolts. Have her on in 2 seconds. Okay, and there's your new wheel bearing on there. 4 bolts. Gave it a quick couple shots with the impact on each one. Make sure you don't over torque them. Now we'll just put the axle back through onto those gorgeous new splines in there, and I'll be right back. Alright, that axle slid right back in there like butter. No problems. So we'll put the axle nut back on a little bit just to hold it on, and then we'll get these strut bolts back on. Remember those 2 big bad boys. Okay, 1 second. Alrighty, there is your axle nut. It's on there a little bit. Your 2 strut bolts, those are back on there. And now we will just take down our twined up brake caliper and we'll put those 2 bolts back on. Oh, sorry, after we put the old rotor back on. Don't forget about your brake rotor. Make sure you put that back on there right now. And there is your new wheel bearing with your old rotor and caliper, brake caliper on top. Word of warning and caution, those 2 bolts, 1 and then 2 in the background there, you can see further down, are all done. About 90% of that job is done by feel. Take your time, do not cross thread these two big bolts. It will be a big bad mistake. Nice and slow, take your time, they'll go in. Just don't start torquing on them until you're sure that you're not cross threaded, okay? It's a big mistake, don't make it. Okay folks, so I've got the brake caliper back on. I torqued back up the strut bolts, the two strut bolts here. If you want to go a step further, you can always mark along the edge right here and try and get it back right where it was there, so it keeps your alignment somewhat where it was. But remember, this is a new wheel bearing, so of course it's going to travel differently than your old one. So I do recommend changing at least 2 at a time and getting a wheel alignment done, because wheel alignments are not cheap. So that's it. Take off your twine, put your tire back on, and that is your wheel bearing change. Not scary, not time consuming. Took me an hour and a half, but I was videoing as well, so probably about an hour long job if you just work straight through it. All right, I hope this helps. Thanks guys, bye.